In past decades, Hollywood was often likened to a dream factory where the weight of fame was skillfully hidden behind a radiant glow. However, behind that velvet curtain, numerous medical records and posthumous memoirs have unveiled a more contemplative side of their private lives. According to published accounts, Elizabeth Taylor at times relied on the support of loved ones to soothe her enduring physical pain. Meanwhile, various sources note that Cary Grant underwent nearly 100 specialized therapy sessions, while figures like Marlon Brando and Frank Sinatra struggled with habits born from the pressures of stardom. These are 15 stories of legends who lived between the brilliance of the spotlight and their own silent internal battles. If you value these authentic glimpses into cinematic history, please subscribe to join us as we explore the dossiers that follow. Elizabeth Taylor. The click of the silver needles. The brilliant light from the 33-carat diamonds on Elizabeth Taylor's hand was at times less blinding than the cold glint of the syringes hidden in her drawers. According to J. Randy Taraborelli's biography, Elizabeth, this icon of beauty didn't seek stimulants for pleasure. She used them as shackles to bind the physical pain gnawing at her. It all began with a traumatic fall from a horse on the set of National Velvet, which turned a young teenager's spine into a wreck, leading to over 70 hospitalizations throughout her life. The most shocking moment in the shadows of her private life is the image of Taylor, her violet eyes glazed with exhaustion, handing a syringe full of painkillers to her son, Christopher Wilding. During an ordinary evening, she casually asked her teenage son to inject the drug directly into her leg because her own hands were shaking uncontrollably. Christopher later recalled this as a memory tinged with horror, witnessing his legendary mother literally melt under the influence of chemicals. Based on records from the Betty Ford Center, Taylor spent decades on a lethal menu hard liquor mixed with high-dose painkillers like Demerol. Doctors of that era, instead of seeking a cure, chose the easiest path over prescribing to appease an A-list star. Taylor didn't choose self-destruction. She was merely trying to silence the screams of her nervous system under the weight of fame and wounds that would never heal. The darkness surrounding Elizabeth Taylor's life proves that even the wealthiest can be helpless in the face of pain. But while Taylor used drugs to escape a physical reality, the next man on our list chose a psychedelic substance to pry open the locked drawers of memory within his soul. That man was Cary Grant, the ultimate sophisticated gentleman, yet a pioneer in a hallucination-filled therapy trend known as LSD. Cary Grant, the LSD trip beneath the tuxedo. Forget the image of the suave debonair Cary Grant seen on screen. Behind that flawless facade was a shattered soul yearning for rebirth. Grant's addiction wasn't about a fleeting high, but a fixation on rediscovering his identity through nearly 100 LSD therapy sessions. According to the memoir Dear Cary, the actor believed this psychedelic substance was the only key to facing his childhood ghosts, the trauma of his mother's sudden disappearance after his father had her committed to a mental asylum for decades. In the 1950s, instead of traditional psychotherapy, Grant championed LSD as a medical savior under the supervision of Dr. Mortimer Hartman. He made no secret of it, even declaring to Look magazine in 1959 that he had been born again and for the first time felt truly conscious. His spiritual dependence on these hallucinogenic trips grew so intense that Grant began exhibiting extreme controlling behaviors, pressuring his wives to join him in using the drug to achieve the spiritual connection he so desperately craved. His ex-wife Diane Cannon later revealed a haunting truth. Grant's elegance was merely a shell for a man lost in a labyrinth of kaleidoscopic illusions. The abuse of LSD didn't fully heal him. Instead, it created an unbridgeable chasm between him and reality, turning their marriage into a painful chemical experiment. Grant used hallucinations to patch his inner emptiness, transforming his life into a long-term medical report of misguided self-therapy. As the distorted colors of LSD faded, we encounter a different kind of obsession, not to open the mind but to control every millimeter of germs lurking in the air. The next man is the king of Hollywood, Clark Gable, who turned cleanliness into a bizarre compulsive ritual. Clark Gable, the king, and the fear of the invisible. The sound of running water in the bathroom was more constant around Clark Gable than the applause of an audience or the shout of "action" on set. Behind the rugged image and the iconic mustache was a man suffering from extreme germophobia. Biographer Warren G. Harris noted that Gable didn't just like to be clean, he was addicted to the sensation of purification to soothe a permanent restlessness in his heart. He would bathe up to 5 times a day and change his clothes immediately if he felt a single speck of dust had landed on his shoulder. This fear of germs forced Gable to live like a stranger in his own world he never touched. Doorknobs always used a pristine white handkerchief to handle public surfaces and absolutely refused to shake hands with strangers who appeared to be perspiring. On set, Gable demanded that all linens and curtains in his dressing room be replaced every single morning, turning his workspace into a sterile laboratory. The tragedy of this behavioral addiction lay in its heartbreaking contrast. Gable spent his life ensuring he smelled of fresh lavender, yet he was forced to wear dentures from a very young age due to severe gum infections. His compulsive cleanliness was a way to mask the internal decay that made him feel deeply ashamed. After the death of his wife, Carole Lombard, his final hygienic barriers collapsed, and Gable spiraled into alcoholism, proving that once his sterile shield was gone, he was just a man helpless against the chaos of life. Gable's cleanliness was a desperate attempt to establish order, but in another corner of Hollywood, there was a man who chose to devour the world to fill his inner emptiness. That man was Marlon Brando, a genius of method acting and a prisoner of an unquenchable hunger. Marlon Brando. Iron Chains and The War at the Refrigerator. Marlon Brando didn't eat to live. He used food as a topical anesthetic to numb the psychological trauma of a broken home. This acting titan possessed one of the most intense behavioral addictions in Hollywood history: compulsive binge eating. In his autobiography, Songs My Mother Taught Me, Brando admitted that food was the only thing that never betrayed him. Yet it was also the very thing that turned him into his own worst enemy at the dinner table. The legend of the refrigerator locks became a dark chapter of his private life. Unable to control his 3 a.m. cravings, his second wife resorted to using a heavy iron chain to lock the refrigerator shut. However, the power of addiction overrode everything. Brando was said to have bitten through the chains or used every tool at his disposal to break the barrier just to reach a piece of cheese or a carton of ice cream. On film sets, he frequently ripped his trousers because his weight would skyrocket overnight, forcing costume designers to prepare dozens of different pant sizes in advance. This loss of control was not merely a bad habit, but a tragic rebellion against the pressure to remain perfect. Brando could consume dozens of burgers in a single sitting or beg friends to throw food over his villa's fence when he was placed under strict dietary supervision. The physical devastation of his later years stands as a testament to a great soul trapped in the endless hunger of loneliness. Marlon Brando filled himself with food, but another beauty icon was besieged by tiny pills, the things that helped her wake in the morning and sink into sleep at night. Marilyn Monroe didn't choose to break refrigerator locks. She chose to shatter her own biological rhythm with a dangerous chemical seesaw. Marilyn Monroe. Little friends in glass jars. Marilyn Monroe never left her home without unlabeled pill bottles, what she affectionately called her little friends. Behind the radiant smile that captivated the world was a body controlled by a ruthless pharmaceutical system. Marilyn didn't use drugs for thrills. She was trapped in a Hollywood production cycle, uppers to stay alert on set and downers to extinguish her fears at night. According to declassified medical records, Marilyn's life was a lopsided war between Nembutal and amphetamines. The studios needed her to be luminous for 18 hours a day, and when she couldn't sleep due to stress, they provided her with heavy sedatives. This dependency turned Marilyn into a chemical doll whose every breath was regulated by private doctors. Crew members often saw her dazed forgetting lines and sometimes needing to be carried out of cars because the side effects were too potent. The tragedy was that the lonelier she became, the more Marilyn clung to these pills for a hollow peace. When death arrived on that August night in 1962, the scene littered with empty bottles was the rawest answer to the question of an icon's happiness. Marilyn was drained dry by the very things promised to help her shine brighter. Marilyn Monroe was a victim of a calculating industrial system, but she wasn't alone. There was another young girl who was fed drugs from childhood, turning her life into an inescapable cycle of tragedy. That was Judy Garland, who began her breakfast with chemical pills before she even learned how to be an adult. Judy Garland breakfast on trays of colorful pills. While other children woke up to a glass of warm milk, Judy Garland started her day with bright, diamond-shaped pills served by MGM studio staff. According to Gerald Clark's memoir, Get Happy, The Life of Little Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz was not a dreamy yellow brick road, but a factory production of chemical-fueled androids. To force a teenager to work 18 hours a day, studio bosses established a brutal routine stimulants to keep Judy awake on the stage, followed immediately by heavy sedatives to shut down her body when night fell. This dependency was not a choice, but a systemic coercion. Judy Garland bitterly admitted in late-life recordings that pills were as natural to her as breathing, for she was taught they were the only way to maintain the energy and the thinness the public craved. Amphetamines stifled her hunger and robbed her of natural sleep, leaving an exhausted soul hidden behind a powerhouse voice. The most painful truth was that even after becoming a superstar, she could not escape the obsession that she needed the pills to shine, leading to mental breakdowns and hopeless recoveries in psychiatric sanitariums. Judy Garland was squeezed dry by the entertainment industry, leaving behind a glorious musical legacy scarred by chemicals. And at another extreme, destruction didn't come from studio bosses, but from a fateful accident that turned a man with an angelic face into a slave to pain and hidden needles. That man was Montgomery Clift, who spent the last 10 years of his life performing the longest suicide in Hollywood history through alcohol and morphine. Montgomery Clift, a mobile pharmacy behind a disfigured mask. The clinking of pills falling into a glass of hard liquor became the fateful soundtrack that haunted Montgomery Clift ever since his horrific car accident in 1956. Before that night, Clift was the ultimate icon of internal beauty and sensitivity. After, he was merely a man trying to patch together a shattered face and a broken spirit. According to director Edward Dmytryk, who witnessed Clift's decline firsthand on the set of Raintree County, the actor transformed his physical agony into the most chaotic pharmaceutical addiction ever seen in an A-list star. More than just using painkillers, Clift turned himself into a mobile pharmacy, his pockets always overflowing with morphine, Demerol, and dozens of unnamed sedatives. He used them as a way to escape from looking into the mirror and witnessing the collapse of his legendary beauty. Friends recalled that Clift often appeared covered in bruises and needle marks, the result of self-injecting, while in a drunken stupor. This dependency made him erratic, sometimes so dazed he couldn't utter a word, other times exploding into uncontrollable fits of panic. The tragedy of Montgomery Clift lay in his full awareness of his self-destruction, yet he was powerless to stop because the pain, both physical and mental, was too vast. His abuse of a lethal cocktail of drugs and alcohol created a state critics called the longest suicide, where every film he made after the accident was a recorded document of a genius withering away. Clift's dependency arose from a sudden tragedy, but the next man on our list turned dependency into a daily ritual where the line between medical treatment and obsessive-compulsive disorder vanished entirely. Howard Hughes, once the richest man in the world, ended his life in darkness, where germs and painkillers were his only companions. Howard Hughes, the billionaire in the dark and the bottles of urine. Light was an enemy, and air was a constant threat to Howard Hughes during the final decades of his life. The legendary billionaire and Hollywood producer wasn't just addicted to isolation. He was addicted to the sensation of controlling his environment through insane hygiene rules and a heavy reliance on codeine. According to the investigative book Howard Hughes, The Unknown Story, after a catastrophic plane crash in 1946, Hughes's body was left in ruins, leading him to find salvation in high-dose painkiller injections, a habit that would eventually imprison his great intellect. Hughes's addiction took on a literally horrific tone. He hid in darkened hotel suites, refused to cut his fingernails or toenails for years, and lined every surface with tissues to avoid touching germs. He would sit naked in dark screening rooms for days on end, consuming only milk chocolate and water, while his nervous system constantly demanded more codeine to silence the pain from old injuries and his overwhelming paranoia. The image of the once mighty aviation tycoon had withered into a skeletal ghost hoarding his own urine in glass bottles, because he was too terrified to use public or even private restrooms. The truth about Hughes only came to light after his death, with medical reports showing dozens of broken needle tips still lodged in his body, grim evidence of countless self-injections performed in the dark. Hughes wasn't just addicted to drugs. He was addicted to the false security that darkness and chemicals provided. The collapse of an empire in the hands of a man who dared not shake a stranger's hand remains one of the darkest paradoxes in Hollywood history. While Howard Hughes used his wealth to build a fortress of solitude, another woman at the other end of the film capital chose to shake the world with an addiction that was loud, public, and defiant. Tallulah Bankhead, the woman who turned cocaine and bourbon into essential accessories for every appearance. Tallulah Bankhead, a glamorous party and last words of bourbon. A raspy laugh and a thick cloud of cigarette smoke were the unmistakable trademarks of Tallulah Bankhead, a woman who turned rebellion into a lifelong addiction. Unlike other stars who tried to hide their vices, Bankhead flaunted them as a badge of honor. She was the embodiment of excess smoking, over 120 cigarettes a day, and drinking hard liquor like water. According to records from The Guardian, Bankhead could finish off a bottle of bourbon in under 30 minutes and still step onto the stage to give a transcendent performance. The danger of Bankhead's lifestyle lay in the chaotic mixing of substances. She considered cocaine a daily staple and frequently stirred sedatives into her cocktails to find inspiration. Her classic quote, "Cocaine isn't habit-forming. I should know. I've been using it for years," stands as a testament to her arrogant denial in the face of physical ruin. She lived as if every day were the ultimate party, despite her lungs and liver screaming from the poisoning of dozens of different chemicals. Even as death approached in 1968 due to pneumonia and exhaustion, her addict spirit never wavered. Her recorded last words, "codeine, bourbon," were not just a request, but a final love letter to the substances that had accompanied her through her brilliant yet mad journey in Hollywood. Bankhead was no victim of pressure. She was the lover of conscious self-destruction. If Bankhead lived to embrace chaos, the next man used power and a glamorous facade to hide a silent yet more devastating addiction, a dependency on thousands of pills each year under the guise of medical care. Elvis Presley, the king who lost his crown to sedative bottles prescribed by a pharmacy known as Dr. Nick. Elvis Presley, a crown. Stolen by 10,000 pills. Behind the shimmering jumpsuits and the frantic dance moves on Las Vegas stages was an Elvis Presley sinking into a pharmaceutical labyrinth from which he would never find an exit. According to investigative reports from the Tennessee State Board of Medical Examiners following his death, his private physician George Nicopolis, Dr. Nick prescribed Elvis over 10,000 doses of various drugs in his final years alone, ranging from stimulants to heavy-duty sedatives. Elvis did not view himself as an addict. He believed that because they were prescriptions, they were medical legal and necessary. The chemical spiral began with the pressure to maintain the image of an untiring king. He used pills to wake up, pills to lose weight, pills to boost energy before a show, and pills to close his eyes once the applause faded. This dependency transformed Elvis from a dynamic youth into a heavy man with a failing memory and unpredictable fits of rage. There were times he fell into comas right in his bed, forcing bodyguards to douse him with cold water or slap his face just to get him on stage in time. Elvis's death in 1977 on his bathroom floor was a grim conclusion to a life managed by chemicals. Autopsy results showed his digestive and cardiovascular systems were completely paralyzed after years of consuming gargantuan amounts of drugs. Elvis Presley was a victim of blind worship and a shielding medical system, a king, given everything he wanted instead of what he truly needed, real psychological help. The king's aura faded among empty bottles, but he wasn't the only one who used wealth to nurture strange habits. Another legendary icon chose to bet her appearance and her peace of mind on a silent, different kind of addiction. That was Hedy Lamarr, who was addicted to the scalpel behind her genius. Hedy Lamarr, addiction to the knife, behind a genius aura. Few would suspect that the woman possessing such an extraordinary intellect, the woman who laid the foundation for today's Wi-Fi technology, was a prisoner of the fear of aging. Hedy Lamarr wasn't addicted to alcohol or opium. She was addicted to the sensation of having her face reconstructed under a surgical blade. According to accounts from her daughter, Denise Loder, Hedy was so obsessed with maintaining her title as the most beautiful woman in the world that she became one of the first A-list stars to abuse plastic surgery when the field was still in its risky infancy. This addiction stemmed from a profound insecurity watching her beauty fade with time. Instead of accepting wrinkles, Hedy sought out surgeons as a weekly lifeline. She frequently demanded facelifts, nose jobs, and lip fillers using the rudimentary techniques of the 50s and 60s. The tragedy was that the more she fixed, the more distorted and unnatural her face became. In her final years, Hedy lived in absolute isolation in her Florida apartment, refusing to go outside and communicating only by phone, terrified that the world would see the failed masterpiece of her surgical addiction. Her beauty, once her greatest pride, ultimately became the prison that confined her brilliant mind. Hedy Lamarr used surgery to fight time, a war she was destined to lose. But if Hedy chose to change her appearance, the next man chose to cleanse himself from the real world through some of the maddest hygiene rituals ever recorded. Frank Sinatra, a man who never felt clean enough no matter how many times he bathed in a single day. Frank Sinatra, the lavender gentleman and the cleansing addiction. The endless sound of a running shower was the signature noise in Frank Sinatra's villas, a man addicted to the feeling of purity. Behind the velvet voice and the aura of the powerful Rat Pack leader, Sinatra suffered from chronic germophobia. According to the memoir Lady Blue Eyes by his wife Barbara Sinatra, the actor could bathe up to 12 times a day. To him, every interaction with the public, every handshake with a fan, or even standing under stage lights made him feel contaminated. Sinatra's cleanliness went beyond a simple hygiene habit. It carried the weight of a psychological compulsion. He could explode in rage if he spotted a speck of dust on a tablecloth, or if someone accidentally breathed too close to his face. After every bath, he would marinate himself in layers of strong lavender cologne to ensure no body odor could exist. Hotel staff where Sinatra stayed recalled him frequently demanding brand new linens and towels after every brief use. This addiction was a desperate effort for Sinatra to feel he still controlled the order amidst a life filled with complex and chaotic relationships. Frank Sinatra used water and lavender to wash away invisible pressures, but that purity could not save him from periodic bouts of depression. Leaving Sinatra's sterile bathrooms, we encounter another kind of pharmaceutical slave, where the illustrious career of an it girl was stifled by endless layers of sedative bottles. Clara Bow, the alluring icon of the silent film era, ended her life surrounded by sedatives, unable to endure the pressure of scandals. Clara Bow, the silent queen and the sedative prison. For Clara Bow, fame brought no joy, only a profound terror of privacy invasion. Hollywood's first it girl was one of the earliest victims of sedative addiction due to a mental health crisis. According to film history records in the 1920s, when private scandals surrounded her, Bow found her only solace in sedative bottles kept right by her bedside to cope with insomnia and horrific panic attacks. Her addiction arose from the desperation to maintain the image of a vibrant, energetic girl before the camera while inside was a shattered soul. Doctors at the time prescribed barbiturates recklessly to keep the star from collapsing. This dependency became so heavy that in 1944 she attempted suicide by overdosing on sedatives but was fortunately saved. After that event, Bow withdrew entirely from the public, spending much of the remainder of her life in psychiatric sanitariums, where she continued to struggle with her reliance on sleeping pills to escape a bitter reality. Clara Bow stands as a testament to how quickly fame can crush a human being when there is no psychological protection. But Bow was not alone in her battle with medicine. Another talented co-star also silently endured the torment of morphine under the guise of medical treatment. Peter Lorre, the actor with the haunting eyes, was actually devoured by morphine injections throughout his long years of filming. Peter Lorre, The Betrayal of the Body and the Morphine Hook. Peter Lorre was famous for his sharp, villainous roles, but in reality he was a victim of a flawed medical system. In the early 1930s, while suffering from intense pain due to gallbladder disease, Lorre was prescribed morphine. According to studio records, what began as a medical pain relief therapy quickly spiraled into a severe addiction that fundamentally altered his life and career. This morphine dependency ravaged Lorre's appearance, transforming him from a slender actor into a man who was obese, lethargic, and at times unable to focus on set. There were periods when film crews had to wait for hours just for him to regain enough lucidity after a potent dose. Lorre once bitterly described morphine as a trap from which he could never fully escape. Even as he tried to sober up to film the Mr. Moto series, this dependency silently shadowed him like a ghost, causing his health to decline severely. He passed away at age 59 from a stroke, an indirect consequence of years of high-dose substance abuse. Peter Lorre survived Hollywood, but he could not survive the remedy his doctors had handed him. And to close this list, we arrive at another somber, premature death, where sleeping pills took away the platinum blonde of American cinema when she was only 26. Jean Harlow, the beauty icon of the 1930s, whose life was ended by sedatives while her body screamed out in illness. Jean Harlow, the platinum blonde and the eternal sleep. Jean Harlow could never have imagined that her habit of using sleeping pills to cope with insomnia would become the primary factor leading to her painful death. In 1937, at the peak of her career, Harlow suffered from severe kidney failure following a string of illnesses from flu to throat infections. However, according to medical records released later, her dependency on Seconal, a potent barbiturate, rendered her condition irreparable. Harlow's drug use was not merely a search for sleep. It was a reliance on chemicals to maintain a false alertness before the lens. During her final days on the set of Saratoga, her body was swollen with uremia and toxins that her kidneys could no longer filter. Yet she continued to take sedatives to try and finish her work. When she finally collapsed, doctors discovered that long-term barbiturate abuse had completely paralyzed her blood filtration system. Harlow died far too young, leaving behind a legacy of beauty that serves as a chilling warning about pharmaceutical abuse in an environment that demands absolute perfection. As each flashbulb fades, so does the sigh of a soul trapped between glamour and self-destruction. 15 names, 15 tragedies. Yet they all share a common denominator. The price of fame is never cheap. Hollywood created gods, but those very gods had to use chemicals and bizarre habits to bear the crushing weight of their crowns. If these shadows have given you cause for reflection, please hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming dossiers on cinematic history. And don't forget to leave a comment whose story haunted you the most. Thank you for journeying with us. We'll see you in the next decoded chapter.